Thank you for joining and welcome to the program, Contractor Life Cycles, Managing Expectations. For this webinar, attendees will be in a listen-only mode. If you need technical assistance, please submit your request under the Support tab, which is located on the right-hand side of your screen. Should you wish to submit a question during the presentation at any time, please use the Q&A tab, also located on the right-hand side of your screen, found next to the Technical Support tab. Presenters will do their best to answer your questions. However, due to time constraints, not all questions may be addressed during this webinar. So now I'd like to turn this presentation over to Catherine Mendoza. Catherine?
Thank you so much, and welcome everyone to our webinar on the contractor life cycle and also touching on managing expectations for those contractors as well. The presenters today, myself, Catherine Mendoza, I'm the Senior Program Manager for the Campbell Institute, and I'm also the EHS Manager for the National Safety Council. And I'm joined today by Richard Sorrenzio, the Senior Technical Director for Corporate HSE&S at ISN. So today, before we get into the content talking about the contractor life cycle, I do want to spend a few minutes just giving you a little bit of background about the National Safety Council, about the Campbell Institute, and then finally about the research that has led to this presentation. So the National Safety Council, as I'm sure a lot of you know, is a nonprofit organization, and we have the mission to save lives from the workplace to any place. One way that NSC works to in fact save those lives in the workplace specifically is through the efforts of part of the National Safety Council called the Campbell Institute. We function as a business unit, a part of that organization, and we too have a mission that is linked to that saving lives. And the mission of the Campbell Institute is to help organizations achieve and sustain EHS excellence. The Institute was launched in 2012, and it works with our member and partnering organizations in service, I guess, of this mission that we have. And the important part of this aspect that I've mentioned here is the participants, so those members and those partnering organizations. And here's a list as of April 1st, 2020 of those organizations that we do work with. The ones kind of on the left-hand side in the lighter boxes, or lighter honeycombs, rather, are our membering organizations, and the ones kind of off to the bottom right there are our partnering organizations. So these are vetted member companies to make sure that they're at highest maturity when it comes to their EHS management. And the partnering organizations are typically those organizations that have some sort of combined interest with the Campbell Institute. One way that we aim to work with these organizations is through through collaborative and also comparative research, where we study the similarities and the differences between all of these organizations or a subset of these organizations. And one of those research papers we actually did back in 2015, where we started this research project on contractor management. We worked with several of these organizations to understand how each of them actually managed their contractor populations. And this is from the beginning of the process, before they actually even work for that company, all the way through to the end when the job is already completed. This research that we did back in 2015 was able to identify 5 essential steps to the management of the contractors during their entire interaction with that owner company. I think one of the things that we realized through this research is that the steps that we identified and those essential key aspects that we identified for each of the companies and also across all the different industries that those members come from, there are definitely some variations, right? There might be things that are more important for some industries than others, but these 5 steps that we've identified here that you can see on the screen are those that are kind of the cross-cutting aspects regardless of the industry. And of course, identifying and detailing that the contractor life cycle, like I said in the beginning, from the beginning to the end. So to just briefly touch on what those five steps are. So there's the pre-qualification. That's really that vetting aspect before the job, or before any contractor's actually been awarded a job. There's the pre-job task and risk assessment. So what risks lie in the job that they're being asked to do. The contractor training and orientation. So that's, preparing them, making sure they set correct expectations. The monitoring of the job. So keeping tabs on those contractors that are actually active on, the owner site. And then finally, that post-job evaluation. So after the job is done, how are those organizations, how did those organizations, the contracting organization actually perform for that job function? So the research that we're going to focus on today is actually a follow-up from this original research that identified these 5 steps. And what we did in this follow-up is we looked at each of the 5 steps, and we worked with the Contractor Management Work Group, which is a group that comes together to benchmark and talk about the practices of contractor management. And we talked with that group to explore what successes and challenges each of them have experienced kind of in present day in respect to each of these 5 steps. And ultimately, hopefully, we're trying to further support the healthy and safe management of those contractors, making sure that organizations know what they're kind of getting into and know what they need to look out for, and also know what works really well for a majority of them. So with that, I'd like to kind of shift and dive into that second aspect, or that second research aspect, where we're going to talk about in each of these steps what successes and challenges we've seen. And Richard will be providing that information as he's the lead for the Contractor Management Work Group. And also, in addition to that, we've identified that there's 3 steps. It's 3 middle steps. So those 3 steps where the contractors interacting on the job site, typically with those owning those owner companies. In those 3 steps, we've seen that there are some additional factors or considerations that companies are seeing and need to pay attention to due to the fact of this COVID-19 pandemic. So I will be covering some of those as, part of my role with the Campbell Institute is to work with other companies to understand on various different topics. And so I will be presenting those, and Richard, of course, will be providing some information as well. So with that, we're going to dig into the first step in this process, which is pre-qualification. So pre-qualification is the vetting of the contractor history as well as their safety performance to determine if a contractor is actually capable of doing the job, what their management processes look like, as well as what the ultimate performance of that company looks like, to make sure that that contractor is in line with the owner company's expectations of what a contractor or how a contractor should perform. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Richard to talk about the successes.
Well, thank you, Catherine, and thank you for having me join you today, and welcome everyone. When looking at the successes of pre-qualification services, the first step in that contractor management cycle, pre-qualification, Campbell Institute members still found that the use of pre-qualification services assisted them with their contractor management process. Now, finding the right contractors in terms of both safety and skill performance is the ultimate goal of a successful contractor management program, and the burden is still on owners to filter for the best contractors for the job. Having a thorough pre-qualification process, be it internal or external, helps you in making that decision. I know experience has taught me that projects tend to go better when you use this search to fit the contractor to the job rather than fitting the job to the contractor. So ensuring they have the proper skill set along with safety is the key to a successful project. And members identified that having leadership support is crucial to the success of your contractor management process. Now, depending on the method you choose, a robust pre-qualification process can help owners with freeing up their internal resources, which will allow them more face-to-face field time with contractors. It can also provide you with tools needed to search and then source those safer contractors by having the ability to see a contractor's rating and assign grades. It also provides an in-depth vetting process that allows you to review a contractor's current and past metrics Things like EMER, TRIR, DART, fatality rates, any other good precursor for future performance. And you can also review a contractor's written program compliance with regulatory requirements, and then their capacity to respond to safety incidents. With this written program review, it also serves as an important piece in helping contractors find and fill the gaps in their safety management programs prior to mobilizing on an owner's site. To help get the full benefits from your pre-qualification process, you need to be sure to take the time to risk rank the work to be performed by each contractor. And then you need to collect and use that contracted data and past evaluations, if you have access to them, to help you in your current decision-making process. And then please be sure to incorporate leading indicators into the pre-qualification process. Leading indicators are the path to zero incidents. And always ensure you open clear lines of communication around expectations, as owners define this as a factor leading to the reduction of contractor injuries. And always be open to promote contractor feedback. Remember that good communication is a two-way street. Now let's look at some of the pain points members identified with communications. When looking at the first step in the contractor management process, the first pain point is finding a lack of qualified contractors in remote regions that extend into rural, non-industrialized areas. Sometimes finding contractors in these areas is harder to do as they're few and far between. You can help ease this problem by having the ability to build a database of pre-approved contractors and then having the process to quickly search that database by area or by craft to find the contractors you need. We all know that in some of those areas, you're just not going to find or expand your contractor database. In those cases, you can try providing additional resources to the contractors on site that with that extra oversight, increasing field resources, increasing site visits, enhancing communications, and then enhancing opportunities for engagement during the job. A second area of concern by owners was the practice of some contractors to what they called game the system. This can be done by contractors creatively managing their accounts by choosing to alter reported rates or not record incidents, or present safety plans that they know will comply with an owner's requirements, but then have little relevance to the way they practice job performance in the field. The so-called gaming practice could potentially give large, unsafe contractors an advantage over those smaller, safer contractors. And one way to try to mitigate this practice is to incorporate the contractor's gaps in their written programs and put those into your job site audits so you're aware of what to look for when you go out to look at a contractor. With that, I'll hand it back to Catherine to introduce the next concept.
Thanks so much, Richard. So that does bring us to the second step in the process, which is the pre-job task and risk assessment. So this step is really the process of gauging the risk and liability of the work that you're asking that contractor to do for whatever specific job that they've been assigned to. I think this process is extremely important from the overall kind of health and safety management of those contractors to ensure that you're putting the right risk mitigation steps in place to make sure that you as the owner company are keeping that contractor company safe. So with that, I will turn it over to Richard once again for the successes.
Thanks again, Catherine. When conducting an independent risk assessment, prior to the start of a job, you need to gauge risk around the work to be performed. This is an essential step to a successful project. You'll also need to understand both the inherent and hidden risks of the work to be performed to be able to assess that the contractor's safety plans, as well as their craft skills, are up to the challenge. Also, by developing and implementing a risk matrix, you'll have a valuable tool to match the risks of the work to be performed and the predetermined risk categories of contractors. Now, this can help you quickly identify and then focus precious resources for those higher risk tasks, as well as hold kickoff meetings prior to the work with contractor leadership to get a feel for their safety culture within their organization. And then by implementing a system that can track and hold these assessments, owners can effectively plan and see the broad scope of work, and then develop additional safety procedures and safeguards as needed for future work. As we touched on earlier, when it comes to successes with task and risk assessment, all members made note of their structured safety plan documentation process. They all have processes in place that require contractor safety plans to be submitted and reviewed by both the contractor and the owner organization. And that review should cover their work processes, certifications, housekeeping, risk tolerance, logistics, and the review should be done not only prior to the job, but then periodically throughout the job. And when those reviews are done, they're best handled by a team effort. And that includes all groups: operations, procurement, maintenance, and safety. This will help ensure that all parties are familiar with the contractor's processes and the review was thorough. Now, as we discuss the pain points, most of them identified by members revolved around compressed schedules, which always leads to time constraints. Both owners and contractors are often forced to play catch up when either work scope change or change orders are suddenly introduced to a job. When this happens, this sometimes leaves little time to reevaluate the risks and then identify some possible new hazards which may have been exposed, which means that safety could be challenged. It also leaves little time for contractors to review the job prior to mobilization and adjust their resources accordingly. And to ensure a comprehensive statement of work and project safety plans are in place due to these time constraints, or for contractors to receive a complete safety orientation, which again is another contributor to poor safety performance. And sudden scope changes, well, they also make it difficult to accurately risk rank the work, which in turn could make it difficult to assign the right individuals to perform the proper risk assessments. Now, being in this business a long time, we all know that change orders will never go away, but with better planning, better decision making, hopefully better scheduling, and a good management of change program, their impact on safety can hopefully be minimized. Once again, I'll pass it back to Catherine to cover COVID-19 as it affects the contractor workforce today.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. So in some of the conversations that we've had with several member companies about contractor management as you know, in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic, for this pre-job task and risk assessment phase, we've identified two different aspects that companies should really pay attention to make sure that, you know, that health and safety aspects are maintained. The first one is the identify any new risk mitigation practices and assessments that may be necessary for that contractor, of course, depending on what job that they're actually doing. So making sure to understand the new risks that the pandemic can actually have on that job. So for instance, if that contractor is potentially public facing, what other, you know, the pandemic in general, or the COVID-19 virus in general, is a risk in itself, but is there additional risk of potential transmission or something like that if they're public facing? And also, you know, kind of in addition to this, are there additional pre-job guidelines or altered guidelines that are necessary to make sure to, you know, to keep those contractors safe, but also is there's kind of that responsibility of the owner company to make sure that those are communicated and, you know, actually, you know, the risk is assessed. So, you know, it could be something like your job standard operating procedures have changed just based on, you know, the heightened risk of the pandemic, and are there, you know, in general, just doing a different and an additional analysis of that job, with the kind of COVID-19 perspective, to make sure that you're not unjustly providing additional risk to those contractors based specifically on the pandemic kind of situation we're in. Anything to add on that, Richard? No, hearing none. We'll go ahead and move on to the
Catherine, I'm sorry.
Catherine,
I apologize. I was cut
no
for
problem.
a second there, but I just wanted to add a real quick issue. COVID-19 is here now, so the plans and procedures for working through it need to be developed and assessed quickly. Now, Catherine talked about the owner responsibilities with COVID-19, but you not only have to ensure that you, the owner, have pandemic plans in place, but so must your contractors. And though they typically follow your direction while on site, you'll need to be able to verify that their pandemic plans meet applicable recommendations, such as things like temperature testing or good hygiene practices. And you have to do this prior to them showing up on your doorstep. Evaluating their efforts, again, can put a strain on resources, so using tools to review plans, programs, checklists, assessments, or even employee self-declarations can be a big help. And other contractors working on site, trust me, they'll appreciate and expect this level of due diligence from you, the owner. Thank you, Catherine.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. All good points as well, very helpful. So that takes us now to the third step in the contractor life cycle. And this one is on contractor training and orientation. So in this step, it includes the communication or the training, right? That very practical aspect of communicating the expectations as the owner organization of their procedures and policies, and making sure that the contractor has those expectations set correctly, but also fully understands what kind of safety procedures or standard operating procedures, that sort of thing, that they need to abide by to do the job properly and also do the job safely. So I will pass it back over to Richard to talk about those successes.
Thanks, Catherine. Members have identified some successes for contractor training and orientation. And with orientation, they've identified the need for impactful orientations by adding additional touch points for contractor orientation. When it comes to site orientations, members realize, and I think we all realize, that much of the safety messaging heard on a contractor's first day is not always retained. They found that rather than fitting all of their meetings, their project discussions, and site orientations into a very small window of information overload, by spreading those meetings out over the first few weeks, it led to frequent owner touch points during the project and a more informal orientation process, helping to build a stronger working relationship. And then owners also found that when they had the time and the tools to properly vet contractor training and certifications from both the safety and craft level, it contributed to a project's success, particularly in specialized work tasks such as confined space, hot work, energy control, and working at heights. I mentioned craft level verification, as I think we can all agree a skilled and experienced worker is usually a safer worker. And I believe that if we didn't believe this, there would be no need for short service employee programs. Some of our owners in the facilities where it's possible have even tied verifications of certifications of contractors to entry badging and site access. This way, they could eliminate the issue at the gate before it gets on the site. And members also found that when they led safety trainings and owners participated in site meetings, the message came across as clearer and increased the owner-contractor engagement. And yet, members still found training and orientation had some areas of concern. And some of the pain points they identified are familiar to all of us and revolve around the ambiguity of responsibility for contractor training. This question has been around for a very long time, and members feel pressure in establishing not only the right level of training needed, but determining who's responsible for delivering that training. Typically, each entity should be responsible for their own areas of training and competency. Owners to communicate their safe expectations and alert contractors to those unique hazards on their sites, and contractors for training their employees on their internal programs and ensuring those employees they provide have the craft skills competency to safely complete the job. After that, owners also found issue with making orientation and training memorable. Contractor crews working in the field, well, they're highly skilled individuals, typically working long hours and long days, and they deserve to have training and information delivered in a format that's tailored to them. Finding ways to train working adults by making better use of videos and in-person discussion rather than using what we do now, PowerPoint presentations, handouts, exams. Well, it goes a long way towards retention of knowledge. And owners are also finding that the last-minute selection of contractors or the high turnover of contractor employees makes it difficult to ensure that all are trained and provided orientation that reaches the field level, sometimes leading to a state of unpreparedness in the early stages of work. Members are looking for ways to ensure that knowledge of both their requirements and a contractor's written programs and procedures are making it down to those field level workers where the work takes place. This can be addressed through field level audits and discussion with contracted workers. It's also possible of adding a process for surveying field employees on their knowledge of site requirements and their company's programs, which could give the same result. I'll pass it back to Catherine to continue with the effects of COVID-19.
Thanks, Richard. So one of the things that we've seen in the training and orientation space really applies to either your employees or the contractors that are on site. So I think, we've seen, I know especially in, the National Safety Council, our internal operations, we have a lot of new or altered policies and procedures that are in place to make sure that we're keeping our employees safe. And I think it's another added step for a lot of organizations to make sure that the contractors are also getting these policies, procedures, and also, the required trainings that might be in place, whether it is, on hygiene practices, how to properly wash your hands. If you're training your employees on that, you need to make sure that the contractors are getting the same information. I think this applies definitely for the before the job training and orientation aspect. So before they have started, incorporating these into kind of that standard training package that contractors get, but also making sure that those contractors that potentially have been on site, before the pandemic started, they're also being retrained or additional trainings for them as well. And I think, like I said, I don't think that, with the pandemic, it's significantly different in the sense of, the policies that are in place for your actual employees or the contracted employees. But it's just I guess in this sense, just a double check to make sure that even though you might not have direct management of those contractors, you'll need to make sure that you kind of reset the expectations that you have for them for those safe behaviors while they're in the workplace. Richard, did you have anything to add on this step?
Yeah, just real quickly, Catherine. I think we're all aware of OSHA's recent changes to the recordability of COVID-related incidents, and it just goes to support Catherine's points about the need for training and for hygiene practices within the orientation period and for those contractors that are already on site. Thank you, Catherine.
Great point, Richard. Thank you. So that takes us to the fourth step, which is monitoring of the job. So this is where the owner company is, it's the active supervising and auditing the work of that contractor, and also not only the work, but those safety practices of the contractor as well. So making sure that they are kind of living up to the expectations or the procedures that you've put in place. And so with that, I will turn it back over to Richard.
Thanks, Catherine. When it comes to job monitoring, members found that owner development and implementation of formal checklists assisted all parties in identifying and addressing hazards. They found that when contractors conducted inspections or audits using a checklist, they were able to limit subjectivity and provide clearer interpretation, which led them to gather more reliable information. And that's what we're looking for. The more reliable the data, the easier to trend and share it, particularly for those of you across multiple sites. They also found that conducting periodic inspections, from daily audits, safety walks, weekly walkarounds, and then monthly and annual meetings conducted by multiple levels of owner employees afforded them increased interaction with contractors and, if needed, unfortunately, quick intervention should an incident occur. Owners also found that less stress on schedule and budget to field level employees helped keep workers focused on safety. And going back to multiple touch points, they also found it's always good for culture building and morale when site management and the owner participates in these inspections. Once again, members found that their biggest pain point with job monitoring was the inconsistent collection of KPIs for contractors. Owners found that collecting consistently reliable data from an ongoing job was a challenge due to concerns related to culture and communication. They also found that addressing these challenges by communicating what the data will be and used for, and how the data can affect the way the job is scheduled and performed, led to more accurate and timely data collection. If contractors know providing data is to their benefit, they'll do it. Members also found that not having the ability to review metrics in real time as the job is taking place, not just at the beginning or the end, and not having something visible like a contractor scorecard sometimes causes a problem. Having the ability to quickly access contractor past performance helped in the evaluation of current operations, again, by identifying and addressing those gaps. Owners also found it more difficult capturing data from smaller or newer contractors on their sites. And those smaller, newer contractors were not familiar with the process of collecting metrics or delivering metrics to an owner. They found more established contractors are plugged into the site safety culture and have better safety performance. Well, this reminds us all and serves as a good reminder to engage newer contractors quickly. And when possible, for the purpose of engagement, try partnering smaller or newer contractors on site with those nested contractors on your sites to give coaching, mentoring, and assistance. Catherine, with that, I'll give it back to you.
Thanks, Richard. So when it comes to the COVID-19 pandemic on this point in the process, I think the important aspect here is to make sure that there is a heightened level of management due to specifically the local guidelines and requirements. So it's always important, again, whether it's your employees or whether it's the contractors, it's important to understand what guidelines are in place, but it's also important to make sure that they are abiding by those procedures, those guidelines, requirements, so on. So I think in this point, it's ever more important to make sure that the leadership is present, not only just to be that kind of, eye in the sky, making sure they're doing their job, but also I think from a cultural aspect, it's important to make sure that the leadership is present. There's the job site itself might be extremely different than most contractors or employees are used to. It might have a lot less people, or they might be doing very different jobs. And so, again, we're seeing that there's a heightened level of management that is needed, for all sorts of different reasons, but also specifically to make sure that the contractors are following suit just as the employees. Richard, anything to add?
Not at all. I think you got it perfectly. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you. So that leads us to, That leads us to the final step in the process, which is the post-job evaluation. So this step is important to assess the contractor's performance after the work has been completed. And it's also important to log that information to make sure to keep perspective if you consider this contracting organization for future jobs. So to talk about those successes and challenges, here's Richard.
Okay, the final step in contractor management, as Catherine pointed out, is the post-job evaluation. Members said that being able to share information among multiple sites, as well as document and house that performance in an easy-to-access repository, was pivotal to those future project decisions. It also aided in the development of detailed lists of contractors, where you need to track both a contractor's good and underperforming field staff. And by proactively creating these positive bidders lists for new projects, as well as restricted lists for poor performance, you won't find yourself under the gun and possibly making poor or forced decisions in tight situations. And owners also found that these evaluations work best when they're performed in conjunction with safety professionals and the contractor, both post-job as well as at annual meetings. They also found that it's best when you can build an evaluation process that can be used by all your sites to help ensure consistent contractor review and grading. And please, once again, remember to include your safety team in contractor performance reviews, as these reviews are not specifically based on budget, but also on safety performance. And finally, let's look at the pain points from our members for post-job evaluations. Some owners found that working with different sized contractors made it difficult to perform evaluations consistently across their contractor base. We need to be able, even though we have a structured checklist, to massage it to the contractor we're looking at. Members with multiple sites brought up the issue of the A and B teams, as contractor performance is not the same throughout their company. People complain that on one site they have a company who does a great job, and on another site they don't. That again supports the issue to share evaluations internally between sites and make sure we're evaluating everything down to the crew level. And again, finding a central place to house this information gives everyone access to that same information so they can make the decisions they need to make. And having the ability to track and close action items and address feedback is fundamental to ending a project successfully. Now, in summary, real quickly, some of the successes we talked about today were the use of pre-qualification services, independent risk assessments, adding touch points to the contractor orientation process, verifying contractor certifications, and looking for opportunities to engage contractors. While some of the pain points were the problem with finding qualified contractors in remote regions, finding ways to make orientation process memorable for contractor employees, and finding ways to consistently collect contractor KPIs. With that, Catherine, I want to say thank you, and I'll give it back to you.
Well, thanks so much, Richard. So we have about 20 minutes left for Q&A, which is great. I find typically during webinars, this is the most impactful aspect of the conversation, just because it's more of a two-way conversation as opposed to us just kind of providing information. But before we get into that, I'll just remind everybody, if you do have a question, you can put it in the question and the chat box over there, and I'll be monitoring those so Richard and I can address those questions as they come up. But I just did want to bring everybody's attention to the screen. If you have any specific questions that you'd rather reach out to one of us on a personal basis, we have provided our email addresses there so you can reach out. And then also wanted to mention that both of the research papers, so the one that was originally done back in 2015 that identified what these steps were, and then also the one that we just recently published on those managing expectations, or identifying the successes and challenges. Those are both available for free download on our website, thecampbellinstitute.org/research. So with that, we do have a couple questions in already, Richard, and so I think the first one that I'd like to address is from Rob, who asks, safety culture drives and sustains HSE performance. How do you measure this in the pre-qual stage?
Okay, well, what I would say is that's where you have those discussions during the pre-qual process with contractors, and more specifically with contractor management. Trust me, with a 10-minute discussion, you can easily find what the safety culture is within their site. And one other quick trick I've learned is years ago is if you visit a contractor site and look at their housekeeping principles on their site, typically housekeeping principles are a direct mirror to their safety culture.
Yeah, and I think I'll just add to Richard, I think especially if they are returning contractors, that post-job evaluation is a great way to have a touch point of observed culture as well. So if you have that information, you're able to log that, and if you're asking that contractor back, that I would definitely consider that as part of that evaluation. Do they have a culture that is at least in the very least kind of similar or meshes well with the culture of the organization? So I think the next question, Richard, is from Doug. He asked, with discussions regarding temperature checks during COVID-19, is there a concern about privacy and potential biometrics? And I think, just in context, specifically for those contracting organizations.
Yeah, and I mean, my experience right now is with doing our own company temperature testing, and we're fine with the privacy issues. Obviously, they're done in very confined spaces, very confidential areas, and I think with an owner, I think the owners have every right to go out and have these temperature checks at their gates, at their sites. Stores are doing it, airports are doing it. There's no reason you can't. I think it's just how you deal with the positive tests that you need to be careful with.
Yeah, and I'll just add, Richard, you just mentioned like how to deal with those positive tests, and I think it's that's certainly relevant for the contractors and for the employees as well. But I think, in relation to that kind of managing expectation or whatnot, I think, and also, that pre-job, even maybe the pre-qual or the pre-job risk assessment, understanding what the procedures are in that sort of situation. I think further, kind of adjacent to that as well is making sure that the employees understand and the contractors understand kind of what the expectations are for how to act around people that may have tested positive and are now back at work, or test positive on the job, the contact tracing, all of that information. There's a ton of, I guess, privacy concerns when it comes to, having an active case or having a positive test or something like that. And so maybe, Richard, I don't know if you have any additional information regarding that, but have you seen any examples of potentially maybe your clients having to deal with those positive tests? And, do you have any kind of, I guess, maybe best practices or recommendations on potentially those kind of behaviors on how to manage that.
Yes, and what I've seen is clients putting out clear communication ahead of time of what the expectations are once you get to the site and that you will be tested, and then dealing with those positive tests, again, in a confidential manner. But then one of the things I didn't mention before that I should have was one of the keys is training people who are going to evaluate people on site, not just with the temperature test, but while they're on a job site. If you notice symptoms, if you notice something not right, obviously you want people to tell their supervisors, but then someone needs to be trained to understand what the symptoms are and making sure that they're not calling out people who aren't experiencing symptoms. So training goes a long way to helping identify and giving somebody some credibility in bringing somebody in for a test once they're on site.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, especially, with the potentially the unnecessary discrimination potentially of employees that, are, or contractors in this case too, right? Of, someone maybe sneezes because they have allergies, but everyone is concerned about, their overall health and whatnot. So I think it's a tricky situation to be in, especially when it's, potentially it's a contracting company and potentially you don't have direct management over them. So all very interesting when it comes to, the pandemic management of contractors. There is a quick question about, is the PowerPoint available? So the actual PowerPoint will not be available, but this recording will be on the Campbell Institute website as well. So the campbellinstitute.org/webinars, and all of our past webinars will be posted there, this recording included. So it doesn't look like we have any other questions from the audience, but as we were sitting here talking, I had a thought about the contractor training and orientation aspect of this. And Richard, I'm interested, have you seen any of your clients have issues with training compliance when it comes to the COVID, the potential changes to their policies related to COVID? I think there's a wide range in this country of kind of the perceptions on how serious this may or may not be, and so I'm wondering if you've seen any of your clients have potential issues with their contractors in that way.
Sure, and not so much just with our clients, but again, sitting on the Safer Task Force and listening to other companies go through these issues. Training of people coming on their site, like contractors, is a key issue. And luckily, I do believe none of them are taking this lightly by any means. They realize the seriousness of the COVID-19 pandemic, and they're addressing it from the start. But again, they're rewriting training programs, rewriting site orientations, rewriting job expectations and entry requirements. And not only are they needing to give this information to new people coming on site, but as you mentioned earlier, they've got, a lot of Campbell members have never stopped working through the COVID pandemic. They've had to keep their businesses running. So they've dealt with people who've worked on site and gone home and come back. So they've got a lot more people to train, and training quickly, but yet thoroughly, has been an issue. But they're all addressing it, and they're all putting their resources to helping that training. Now, unfortunately, you got to make sure you have enough resources. You can't just focus only on COVID and forget about everything else. So you got to find that balance, you know what I mean, to train people on COVID, existing people on site, plus new people, but then yet still do the site inspections, the audits, the pre-quals, and everything else that goes with it.
Yeah, I really appreciate that you mentioned that, because I think, so many people can be laser focused on the pandemic and, the heightened concern in that area, but quite frankly, the other risks still exist, right? So it's about managing both types of those risks, those current ones, or I guess those maybe standard ones for the job being done, but also, you know, there's the additional ones. So I really appreciate you pointing out that fact. So we did have a question come in from Michael. He asked, the third-party pre-qualification services provide a paper-based and lagging indicator assessment. Do you have any insight into leading indicator assessments?
Yeah, we do. We and hopefully I can talk about this, but yes, we've actually put out a paper on leading indicators in contractor management that can be found. But I think leading indicators are key. If we just focus on lagging indicator assessment, we're never going to get to zero incidents. I do believe we can get to a zero incident site, but to do that, it's going to take looking at leading indicators and also looking at turning lagging indicators into leading indicators. I don't think there's any lagging indicator that can't be used as a future leading indicator. So I think it's important. But yes, there are papers out there, and if somebody wants to contact me individually, I can guide them to where it is, or go to our website. You'll find it there.
You can feel free to share with the group as well, Richard, if it's an easy way to access. You know, no need to be shy about it for this audience. But I do. Do you know of any maybe just off the top? I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but do you know of off the top of your head what an indicator is that you know that you identified in that research?
Yeah, sure. Trainings, and not just trainings assigned, but trainings completed versus trainings assigned. And then senior management inspections and audits on a job site and interactions. We talked about engagement a lot through this past presentation that we just went through, but it's so key. But again, you know, back in my life before ISN, you know, my bonus was based on our TRIR. It was based on all lagging indicators. What it should be based on, and what hopefully it is now in companies, is are you getting out and are you doing 3 or 4 site inspections a week? Or are you hosting a safety council? Or are you hosting toolbox talks or safety meetings? Or are you just standing at the front gate at the beginning of a turnaround, handing out a donut to each person who comes in and wishing them a safe day? These are leading indicators that we've seen, and in the survey that we took, and I believe it was about 230 respondents from 191 companies who gave us this information on what they saw, and leading indicators was a big part of this.
Yeah, that's great. Is that research available for anyone?
Yes, if you go to www.isn.com, you could find your way to it. Or if you can't, contact me individually and I'll help you.
Yeah, I think something else we can do too is when we post this, when we post the recording of this webinar on the Campbell Institute website, we can go ahead and provide a link to that as well under the recording if you and ISN are comfortable with that, Richard.
Great, thank you, Catherine.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think I think I remember reading that paper, and it was certainly a lot of great information in there. So yeah, I definitely think that's a good resource for folks as well.
Yeah, and we talked a lot today about data, and data is great, but if you don't do something with it, if you don't have something like data sciences or analytics to take that data, you know, cut it, trend it, read it, you know, spin it around, then that data is useless.
Yeah, very much so. So not so much a question, but I think it might spark an interesting conversation, Richard. So Robert made the comment that uninformed contractors are usually a good indicator. Any thoughts on that?
I'm not following the question. Maybe you can give me more on that. Uninformed contractors are a good indicator of?
Well, that's all that was written, but I think the point being made that, if you while you're monitoring the contractors, or while you're working with the contractors on the job, if they are uninformed, or if it's obvious that they're uninformed, that might be potentially a good indicator to understand, or potentially like cross-check that pre-qualification, aspect of it, and further,
Yes,
for the.
Yep, I agree, and I think it is. I mean, an uninformed contractor, it could either be in their own process, or it could be in your process too as an owner. So you do need to go back. You need to peel the onion and see, like we do with everything else, with incident investigation and all the other things we do, is peel it back, see what the reason is of why they're uninformed. And if it's whatever that reason is, that's where you need to target to get it right, because uninformed and on site is not a good combination. So you need to address that as soon as you can.
Yeah, I think so. And, I'll also apologize. I briefly looked at that question. He said uniformed. So those that are well-dressed, I think would be a good indicator, in the sense of they are well prepared for the job and trained for that sort of aspect. So my apologies on that, but I think I may have filled in that aspect of uninformed, in the sense that I think I know I've had several conversations with member companies that when you have a contractor group that is uninformed, it is very obvious. But yes, in this case, uniforms. So actually wearing uniforms.
and Catherine, it's funny, but Robert, you hit it right on the head. I agree with you. Uniformed contractors who show up on site with clean vehicles. Again, what I talked about earlier in the presentation, when you go to a contractor site and there's good housekeeping principles, the warehouse is in order, the office is in order, again, that all mirrors what the safety culture is.
Yep, absolutely. So it looks like we just have a couple minutes left, and no other questions or comments have come in. So, Richard, do you have any final thoughts or anything you'd like to share?
No, the only thing is, I've been, in my whole career, I've been a big believer in engagement. Years ago, in my company, we had hand injuries. They were 40% of our recordable incidents. We didn't know what to do. We had one of our employees come up with an idea to have a contest amongst family and the children of our employees. And a 16-year-old girl came up with this hand poster. We put it up on all of our trailers. It was a 16 by 20 foot pink and purple banner in refineries and chemical plants that didn't go over so well back in the late 90s. But yet our hand injuries dropped by 50% in 6 months. And the reason for that is by engaging the employees and asking their input. The same thing on site with contractors. You get contractor input into the process, and they're going to make it a success. So I think that's key, and that's something I've been preaching for the last 20 years. That's what I have, Catherine. Thank you.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Richard. And I want to thank everybody else on the phone for joining in and listening to not only the presentation, but this Q&A as well. A big thank you, of course, to Richard from ISN for joining us and presenting this information with myself. And with that, I wish everybody a healthy and safe day. Take care.
Thank you all.